As we are now in week 2 of this federal election campaign, the latest polling shows the Liberals pulling ahead. New poll numbers by Nanos Research show the Liberals leading with nearly 42%, followed by the Conservatives at 37%, the NDP sitting at 10%. So to break down what these poll numbers actually mean, I'm joined this morning by Nick Nanos, founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. He's joining us from Ottawa. Welcome back for week 2, Nick.
It's good to see you, Anne-Marie.
I love this because it really gives us a sense of how fast things are changing, and we can dive in with you about why. Last week, your polling had the Conservatives. They had a slight lead over the Liberals. So what has changed since then?
Well, what we've seen in the beginning of the campaign is the Liberals picking up in the first 8 days, basically 1 percentage point a day over the beginning of the campaign. And I think this speaks to the fact that Mark Carney has a bit of an advantage. First of all, because he's the leader of the Liberal Party, like Pierre Poilievre being the leader of the Conservative Party, they get so much coverage. Carney gets extra coverage because he happens to be Prime Minister. And as Prime Minister, he has to respond to Donald Trump when he says stuff. And, you know, as a result, what we're seeing is the Liberals picking up. They're also picking up in the province of Ontario, which is a big game changer in terms of who will likely form the next government. But you know what, Anne-Marie, it's still way too early.
Yeah.
There's lots of time for politicians to mess up, and we know they can mess up. And you know, the thing is right now, at least, the advantage is with the Liberals.
Okay, let's take a look at preferred prime minister. And I always like to say to people, look, in this country, remember, we don't choose, we're not choosing a president or like a prime minister. We don't pick just that person. We're picking our local candidates. But Liberal leader Mark Carney polling at 48%, Pierre Poilievre at 32%. That's a bigger divide. Carney has been with the Liberals as a leader for less than a month. So what are the factors here? Like, what is coming into play in this divide?
You know, I think the factors for Mark Carney is that, you know, he came off a big win. If you remember, Anne-Marie, he won 86% of the vote in the Liberal leadership. He went from there to being Prime Minister. Then he was, why don't we just say jet setting? What do you want to call it? Travel, went to Europe, talked to, you know, the leaders of France, the United Kingdom, and so forth. And he's been super proactive on that front. And it's been hard. I think one of the challenges we have to recognize, it's hard for, you know, Pierre Poilievre, as the other main candidate who can form a government, to get coverage, because he's basically crowded out by Trump, and he's also crowded out by Mark Carney as Prime Minister. Anne-Marie, it seems a lot like the Ontario election. If you remember, Doug Ford and Trump, that's what it was all about. It was hard for Stiles and Crombie to kind of get in the narrative.
Yeah, well, I remember that. And for people who weren't following the Ontario election very closely, every time there was something that came up about tariffs, of course, Conservative leader Doug Ford then stepped in as the role of Premier and was able to speak on the province's behalf. I want to take a look at this 5-point advantage and get into where that is coming from. Where are each of these parties forced to pull from, and what is it doing to smaller parties like the PPC or the Greens?
Yeah, actually, what we're seeing for the Liberals is that they've built up their advantage in their recovery. Why don't we call it? Because they were, just remember, they were at 20% at one point. Now they're in the mid-40s. You know, so they built up their advantage in Ontario and Quebec. The other interesting thing, Anne-Marie, that's happening is generational. If you're under 35 years of age, the Conservatives actually do really well among individuals under 35. The Liberals do well among individuals at over 55. And, you know, it's pretty close when it comes to middle-aged Canadians.
I want to ask you about undecided voters and where that sits for both of these leaders, because every conversation I have, people say, well, what do you think? And I've asked them what they think. There's a lot of people, as compared to other elections I've covered, where they say, I'm just not sure yet. So where can either leader take advantage of this undecided voter pool?
I think there are two things in terms of what you've just asked. First of all, the support for the Liberals is soft because it's just swung. So people might be leaning towards Carney and the Liberals, but it's not a complete lock. When we ask Canadians whether they are completely undeclared, like we ask whether they're voting and we ask whether they're leaning, and when we get to the undeclared or unsure, it's basically about 1 in 10 or thereabouts. But, you know, the thing is, once you get past that 1 in 10, a lot of those new votes for the Liberals are not rock solid. And I think this is what Pierre Poilievre is hoping for. The big question is how will each of the party leaders deal with Donald Trump? And I think that's what's going to be the laser focus of Canadians. They're going to size up both of those individuals and see who has the mettle, the character, and the ability to best navigate on Canada's behalf.
Well, and a great opportunity for both of them to do that this week with so-called Liberation Day or April 2nd coming, and we'll find out more about tariffs and the messaging from south of the border. Nick Nanos, founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. Always great to have you here. Thanks so much. If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.